Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the LCI Green Room. I'm Jacob Winograd, host of the Biblical Anarchy podcast here at the Libertarian Christian Institute, here for a very weird, very impromptu live stream slash bonus episode of my podcast. So, literally just threw this together the last minute. So, we're going to be really extra. I'm combining words because of how flustered I am. We're going to be extra open and extra unscripted, as the tagline to the green room goes. Bear with me here because I'm going to be actually doing kind of like a simulcast. I'm going to be uh, doing a X Spaces along with this YouTube stream, and it's going to be like all one combined show. That way, everyone can watch and participate, and I don't have to republish later. So, in the meantime, if there's anyone who has any questions or comments, I can deal with those. I'll be doing some monologuing while I get this Spaces set up. So, just bear with me one moment here. Been a while since I made a Spaces, and I don't even remember how you do it from how do you do a Spaces from desktop? I like X, but man, it sometimes feels very convoluted how to make things work. So you know what I'm going to do? I don't know how to make a Spaces uh, from my computer. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to do it from my phone because that is actually a lot easier for some reason. At least it should be. Spaces. Check out Spaces. We're going to create a new one discussing the morality of the non-aggression principle is what we're talking about tonight, and it pertains to the recent election as well. So we're going to schedule this for today at 8. We're going to say 8:50, but I'm going to start it early. All right, space is scheduled. We're going to copy the link. I'm going to post the link in the post I made earlier on X. As I said, extra unscripted tonight, folks. All right, posted right here. Boom. And I'm just going to retweet all of this. Live now, or jump into the spaces. Boom. Alrighty. And now what we'll do is click on this, click here. All right, we're going to start the spaces. All right, spaces should be open. Try to figure out if I can not make this bigger. I guess I can't make it bigger. All right. And now I'm going to share screen. Actually, let me invite speakers. Share, copy link, messages. Boom. All right. There we go. We can blow this up. That's a lot better. And we're going to do a share screen so that you guys on the YouTube can watch as well. Hmm. Still waiting for my guest to join. As soon as he joins, we will hop over. Just messaging him right now. I'm going to start editing this a little bit. All right, just waiting for the guest to join us. But in the meantime, nope. All right, here, so we're going to do this and solo. All right, so I want to get this thing properly started while I'm waiting for the guest to join, which will give me some time to do some of my opening monologuing, I suppose. And all right, sorry guys, I was getting things. I'm talking to everyone now because I'm streaming on YouTube and on X. So we're just waiting for. I have a guest who's going to be coming to talk with me tonight. Who is goes by Monarcho Hoppian here on X, or Open Borders Hoppian, which can be confusing because that's not typically what Hoppians are. But that's all right. Before he joins, I'll do kind of just an opening monologue, and I'm kind of doing a spaces / making this a bonus episode for my show. So I hope you guys enjoy this. So this is a bonus episode of the Biblical Anarchy podcast, and it's going to be an interesting one. I wanted to do an episode where I talked about the election some more and just sort of why I did what I did, which was vote for Donald Trump, which was not something I ever really thought that I would ever do. I remember, I mean, it's kind of surreal for me because actually the journey that led me to libertarianism was when Donald Trump was elected in 2016, and I didn't vote for him then. I was actually sort of, I guess, I kind of fell for the propaganda back then. I mean, for those of you who don't know, I was always an anti-war lefty. I was always a uh, anti-interventionist. I knew about sort of like I think from the time I was in high school, even just the lies that had been sold to get us into the wars in Iraq, and also just the antecedents that had been truncated for the war in Afghanistan. And uh, I was very skeptical of state authority, but I was younger, and when Bernie Sanders, my preferred candidate at the time, didn't get the nomination, unfortunately. I didn't know who I was going to vote for, but just kind of all my Democrat friends sort of like fear mongered me and peer pressured me. into voting for Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump because they just portrayed Trump as this like potential dictator who was going to take away free speech, who was going to take away everyone's rights, and it was just going to be really bad. And so, because of that, I felt like I had no choice but to do that. And now, years later, it's like, after that experience where, despite Trump not being a great president, he wasn't what the left initially sold him as. That kind of cracked my worldview open. The left went hard on identity politics and just everything being Trump, 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 and just 24/7 news cycle about how bad Trump was, and oftentimes making up lies rather than going at the actual things that they could have been criticizing him over. And that's sort of what led me to being politically homeless, which led me to libertarianism. Um, the reason why I voted for Trump was ultimately just a pragmatic decision. I wasn't impressed with the Chase Oliver campaign. I tried to give him a fair shake, had him on my show, had a conversation with him. I always try to be fair. And I, of course, have probably more in agreement just on a strict, like, if you were going to do a tally mark or like a checkbox list of the things that I agree with Chase versus the things I agree with Trump on. But to vote at all, there needs to be some kind of gain, right? Because I don't believe you have to vote. And if I'm going to vote, I need to either have a really good protest vote, or there needs to be some sort of practical utility or potential upside to one of the other candidates that is actually going to have the chance of winning. And Trump, just like, he threw enough up there and the people around him threw enough up there that I went, you know what? There's not like a high chance that a lot of this happens, but there's enough of a chance and enough different here that I'm just going to vote for it. I'm going to support it. I want to see what happens. I want to see how a Trump presidency, with all the promises and all the different people that are around him this time, I want to see how that plays out. But of course, other than, maybe like debates about the Libertarian Party and things that some libertarians were complaining about there regarding Angela McArdle, which I'm not going to focus on here right now. But I think the other sort of objection you hear to libertarians who kind of thought the way I did was that, well, either you shouldn't vote at all, or if you're going to vote, it should be only voting principled. And if you advocate for like Donald Trump to be president because he might do some good things, he's still going to do some bad things, that, and that violates non-aggression principle. And so you're kind of forsaking your principles to some extent to vote pragmatically. And I don't know that that's necessarily true. That's not the way I conceive it. But this gets into a much broader discussion about what is the non-aggression principle and how does the non-aggression principle guide us? What does it tell us? What doesn't it tell us? And so I kind of labeled the title of this space discussing the morality of the NAP, and we'll even discuss if the NAP has any morality. And again, this was all very impromptu. I was actually planning on recording a solo episode tonight to release tomorrow, but then Monarcho Hopian asked if I wanted to do a space, and I said, you know what, I think that'd be a fun conversation because it kind of ties into what I wanted to talk into anyway. So with that kind of opening out of the way, he's here now, so I'm going to bring him up here and we'll get started. Let's see, I think I tried to approve. That didn't work, so now, all right, there we are.
Yeah, I'm in here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. How are you doing tonight, sir?
Yeah, good, thanks. How are you?
Doing all right. Give me 1 second here. I'm going to switch because I'm live streaming this to YouTube as well. So I'm just going to share screen on this end. Audio is on. All right, we should be good. People who are watching on YouTube, just give me some thumbs up or ones in the chat to make sure that you can hear the guest as well as me. I don't know how we want to get started. I mean, I know we tried having a conversation a while ago and that didn't work out because we just had technical issues back then. So you and I have had some interactions before in the past, but I don't know if you want to start out just by kind of giving a little bit of information just on yourself and just sort of your background as a libertarian
Yeah,
and stuff like that, and then we can kind of get into the
yeah,
discussion quick.
yeah. Sure, sounds good. And I apologise, my audio's bad at the moment. I'm driving, but I'll be out of the car within the next kind of 5 or 10. So if that's an issue, then just let me know. But I'll be good very shortly. Anyway, yeah. So I suppose obviously the reason we kind of wanted to have this, as you said, very impromptu discussion was because I saw something that you posted just about how if we're looking through the lens of the NAP, then we can kind of say that there's some actions that are worse than others, and I kind of took issue with that, which is fine. I always like having these discussions. There's no kind of ill feeling there at all, and I think it's important to have these discussions. But yeah, so look, my background kind of in libertarianism kind of came about. I'm kind of one of those kind of COVID times type libertarians where I kind of was just kind of, I don't know, not very political or not very kind of interested in philosophy much for, most of my teenage years up until COVID when I was kind of 20 years old and kind of realized, hey, well, first of all, I had a lot more time in my hands because being Australian, obviously we were one of the more heavy-handed countries when it came to kind of lockdown restrictions and all that kind of stuff. And so, I had a lot more time on my hands to kind of do this kind of, investigation into philosophy and politics and ideologies and that kind of thing. And B, I was kind of taking issue with how the Australian people and the Australian government were handling the COVID pandemic. And so that's kind of how I got drawn to libertarianism. I remember watching, similar time to when I was kind of having this, I don't know, epiphany you might call it, or kind of getting my feet wet in this kind of space. A guy who many of you might recall, Anglo Libertarian, released. It was very good timing. It was like the video came out maybe 2 weeks before I kind of started looking into anarcho-capitalism, and he basically released a video called the basics or the fundamentals or something like that of anarcho-capitalism, and I watched that kind of 15-16 minute video, and I was like, this is probably where I want to kind of this is where I kind of lie on this issue. So that was kind of my initial foray into libertarianism and how I kind of got started, and then I kind of went down the standard kind of route of reading Rothbard and Hopper and all the other kind of thinkers that we kind of associate ourselves with, and more recently, kind of getting into debating and discussing these issues myself. So that's kind of where I've come from and why I've kind of, how I've kind of, had this path towards where I am now.
All right, yeah, right on. I mean, yeah, certainly COVID made a lot of libertarians out of us, or made a lot of people who were already libertarians much more vocal than we used to be. That's actually when I started my podcast, was late 2020, in response to the ongoing COVID mania. Although I, obviously cared about the political end, but I also, as a Christian, was very annoyed at that so many Christians, and that there were some churches who remained open in defiance of lockdowns, but there were so many that were continuing to not meet, or to meet with special guidelines and restrictions. And I just kind of felt like, I don't know, if we're going to take our faith seriously, then, maybe one of the most basic things that makes us a religion, and which is the gathering of the believers and doing what churches are supposed to do, which is caring for the poor, which is establishing community. I was like, the Bible says we must obey God rather than men. So I was like, at what point are we going to take that seriously, or are we just going to close up shop and say we don't actually believe what we say we believe? And so yeah, that's interesting. I feel like a good way to maybe break this in, or shift this over into the conversation we want to have, would be for me to perhaps just recount. I'm going to bring it up here, just the post that I made, and sort of like your initial responses, just to kind of give context for this, because I think that'll make more sense than kind of jumping into it without much. So I made a post. I was quote tweeting dissident media. They said, yeah, government infringes on your liberties, but some governments infringe on your liberties less than others. So I quote tweeted that, and I added to it, and I said, as an ANCAP, I judge all things, And I'm saying, like, so as an ANCAP, like as an anarcho-capitalist, which is, I think you and I would agree, that's like it's a philosophy of law, it's a legal theory. It's not like a holistic worldview necessarily. That's why I'm a Christian as well, and I don't make anarcho-capitalism my religion. But insofar as I am an ANCAP, I judge things through the filter of the non-aggression principle and private property rights. And while the state is a fundamental distortion and violation, and of these natural rights, which I'm sure you would agree with, right? The state is the antithesis of of self-ownership and the non-aggression principle and private property rights. Everything the state does, it does through fiat or coercion or the threat of force in some way. If the free market is based on subjective value and people exchanging services and goods based on uh, believing that they can, trade things that they have different value for and end up in a better place based on their own subjective value judgments, which means that ideally in a free market, it seems like everyone is benefiting from the interaction and it's consensual. The state is, again, like at every layer of that description of how free market interactions work, the state is flipping that, and it's involuntary, and it's not based on subjective value judgments of individuals, but rather it's based on central planning, it's based on fiat, like we said. And so those interventions distort they distort the market, they distort the realm of human interaction, they distort the law. and and so that's what I meant by that. And then I added, but that doesn't mean that all state interventions or actions are equally harmful or equal in their importance. And you then responded saying that you disagree because you think I'm bringing in, at least even if I'm not like abandoning the nap in this analysis, that I'm bringing something else in to make the statement that not all violations of the nap are equal. So do you want to maybe expound upon that, your initial comment there, what you meant by the nap doesn't provide us the ability to, like your example was stealing a penny and murder are both illegal. Those are both violations of the non-aggression principle of libertarian ethics. But you would say that we can't, from self-ownership or the nap alone, determine which one of those is worse.
Yeah, I mean, look, all I was saying was, and I certainly agree with you that I agree with you in principle, or I suppose in general, that we can certainly say that some states are worse than others. Just taking the hypothetical case of a minarchist state that only intervenes in courts and police and all the stuff that minarchists want the state to do. That state, I think you and I would both agree, is would be a better place to be than North Korea, right? We would both agree with that, I think, in general. All I was claiming was that you actually can't get to that conclusion purely by referencing legal theory, because legal theory only deals with it's a binary in the sense that an action is either illegal or legal. That's all that the legal theory is trying to do. It's telling you, okay, here's the set of here's the sum total of all possible actions that people could take. There's either category A, illegal actions, or category B, legal actions, and that's all the theory is trying to do, right? So my point was only that, not to even really disagree with the thrust of your argument, which was that you could make the case that a Trump presidency would be better than a Harris presidency or something like that. Just that I don't think that you're getting to that conclusion through the NAP, which was kind of what I interpreted your comment as, which was, like you said, I look through the filter of the NAP and through property rights. Therefore, say a Trump presidency is less bad than a Harris presidency would be. And I just disagree with that because, as I said, it's kind of, I see legal theory as a binary. Either actions are illegal or they're not. And that's all that you can really derive from the non-aggression principle, is that you ought not initiate conflicts over scarce resources. And if you were to try to, make some kind of statement about, say,
X action is worse than Y, you are by necessity, say, I mean, maybe smuggling in would be the right word, some other unstated moral assumptions about action that isn't just covered by the legal theory, if that makes sense.
So I think what I would need to ask, and I tried asking this in our back and forth on the thread before we agreed to move this over to a spaces, but where I'm having trouble accepting so your sort of premise or description there is when you use the language that there's an ought, because you said just there in your response and in the thread that the NAP is legal theory that states that we ought to avoid conflicts over scarce resources. And I guess the word there that's triggering me is the word ought, because an ought means that there is like an obligation to do this. And now I can agree with you that um you were making allusions to like, well, we if the so if we were going to try to say that, for example, theft uh is not illogical, or theft is like, it doesn't make sense when you try to, because you end up with like performative contradictions if you say like stealing is good, because then you're saying, well, it's good to have property taken from me unwillingly, but if it's good and you like it, well, that would mean that it's not unconsensual because you like it. So it doesn't make sense. And it's like I understand the point you're trying to make, and I certainly, I think there's a lot of great arguments. Even like, no, I obviously do both. I engage in libertarian apologetics and then Christian libertarian apologetics. So I always try to know how to argue from both standpoints. But there are a lot of great arguments to prove the validity of libertarian ethics. One being, sort of like, hey, there's contradictions when you try to employ different norms for property and aggression and etc. And I think that's well and good, but I don't think that the truth of those statements brings with it uh, an ought. Like, you can include an ought, but then I'd have to ask where you're getting the ought from, because I don't think that you can just get to, because something is true, that you ought to listen to that or follow after that without adding in some other, uh, smuggling in some other presuppositions. That's the way I see it. Where would you say that I'm wrong in my analysis?
Sure. So I think, and this is something that I think I kind of was alluding to right at the end before I kind of said, hey, maybe it's just better to talk this one out rather than trying to, do it in a, various text posts on Twitter, which is always can be difficult. So hang on, let me find it. Yeah. So what I was getting at was that my statement is not that you that it is wrong or immoral to engage in a performative contradiction. I have no issue if you wanted to, like, if I said right now, I am not speaking, right? That would be a performative contradiction, because by the very act of saying I'm not speaking, I'm contradicting my own statement, right? So that's a performative
Right.
contradiction. I don't believe I've done something immoral by doing that, right? Like, I didn't just commit, a sin or some moral, I didn't do something immoral, is what I'm getting at, by just making that statement. Then I am not speaking. I didn't do something immoral. So I don't have any issue with people engaging in performative contradictions. Like, I don't really care per se. Right. What my claim was is that if we accept that any that the statement, we ought to initiate conflict, or we ought not avoid initiating conflict, is probably a better way of putting it, which is what any legal theory other than the NAP proposes, right? Any theory other than the NAP proposes that in some cases, or in all cases, initiating conflict is permissible. Okay, if we are to say that by making the statement you ought not obey the NAP, maybe is the most succinct way of saying it. If you make the statement we ought not obey the NAP, and if that statement is necessarily a stolen concept fallacy, which is the more objectivist way of looking at it, so we maybe don't have to get into that one, because I know there's obviously going to be disagreements potentially about that. Or if we take the Hoppian argument from argument, argumentation ethics type line where it's a performative contradiction.
Right.
If it's the case that it's a performative contradiction or some kind of fallacy to ever propose that we ought not obey the NAP, if that's the case, then by definition we ought to obey the NAP has to be true because it's proof by contradiction, because of the law, as I mentioned, the law of non-contradiction and the law of excluded middle, right? So there is no third option between NAP and not NAP, and there's also no way for it to be both true and untrue that we ought to follow the NAP, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I followed all of that, and I don't disagree with any of that. Other than to say, then I'm confused because to me, when you introduce an ought, that is sort of a statement of like you're staking out some kind of moral claim, wouldn't you be? Like I don't know how you can use the language of ought without invoking that there is some, which was sort of like, part of our disagreement was like you saying that the NAP, the libertarian legal theory, doesn't you know give you these sort of moral considerations, but you seem to be arguing for the basis of the NAP using logical
Okay,
rules and the
sorry. Can I just want to interrupt real quick because I'm not actually saying that I don't think that there's any moral considerations with the NAP. That was not my claim. I suppose to be more specific, my claim was that you cannot make any assessment about the magnitude of some immoral action using the NAP. So I cannot say that one illegal action is worse than another illegal action simply by referencing the non-aggression principle. That's all I was saying. I'm not saying that because I mean people kind of people there's kind of a conflation that goes on between morality where it's somehow different, or I don't know exactly. I don't know what's going on there, but absolutely there is a moral claim within the NAP.
okay.
We ought to follow it. There absolutely is 100%. There is a moral claim embedded within the NAP that says we ought not initiate conflicts. Absolutely. There's no disagreement between you and I don't think there. What I'm saying is simply that the NAP cannot tell you whether one illegal action, i.e., one immoral action, is worse than another. You need some other moral theory, whether that's Christianity or objectivism or virtue ethics, whatever you want to come up with, whatever other moral framework you might propose that also fits within the legal theory of that complies with the legal theory. Sorry, you need that on top of the NAP in order to make some sort of type of claim about the magnitude of how bad a crime is, if that makes sense.
So how would you conceive a libertarian legal theory working, like based on your answer? Would there, like, for a libertarian legal theory to actually be enacted upon, you would have to have some outside morality in the society? Because otherwise, the reason I ask that is because it's like, all right, well, if what in the hypothetical, if people didn't have that, would there be no way of actually adjudicating uh conflicts? Right? Because if you can't judge other than to say, well, it's wrong, but then, like, well, then how do you go about restitution? How do you go about, like, resolving the conflict if the NAP doesn't have those answers? Unless you would just say, well, no, a libertarian legal theory has to uh like, problem solving and conflict resolution, although it should use the NAP to determine who initiated the conflict and to define what conflict is, and who owns property, etc. It falls short in terms of being a self-sustained system that also gives you the tools you would need to then resolve those conflicts. So do you kind of see where I'm trying to? Uh,
Yeah, so
okay.
what I would say is that the most that you can get out of the NAP in terms of what the proper restitution for a crime is simply that it's an eye for an eye, if that makes sense. So the NAP would prescribe that if you steal $100 from someone, then, and I've had chats with Liquid Zulu, obviously, who about this, because we were discussing it in some context, can't quite remember, but he basically said that if you steal $100 from someone, then the proper restitution that you can get from that via the NAP is simply that you owe $100 in restitution to make the victim whole, and then I think another $100 as punishment, I think was the kind of standard that he went by. But again, that I don't think you need to make a claim about the magnitude of the crime, how bad the crime is, in order to get to that point where you're saying that this is the restitution. You're simply equating, okay, there was $100 stolen in this case, or there was a car stolen in this case, in this crime. Therefore, the restitution is a car, or it's a hundred
All right. So
dollars.
so
That's simply
so
what you're doing.
so let me ask you, like, what about what if I steal $100 from you, and we go by your answer, and I pay back $100 for what I stole, $100 in punishment, and then
Hmm.
I do that again, and I do that again, and I do that again. Like, I just keep on stealing from you and having to, and uh,
Hmm.
so uh, you're saying that there would be no way to, like, add in, like, okay, like, repeat offenses might come with steeper penalties, or like, what if I
Well,
steal,
you
well, and
could,
then
but
let me add, like,
yeah,
what if I steal,
yeah,
like,
go.
I pickpocket you versus I hold a gun to your head and say, give me your wallet, right? Like, because one kind of implies, like, I snuck your property away from you, which is still an act of aggression, but then one is like, I was actually threatening deadly force against you, and then compelled you to give me your property using that threat of force. So again, it's like, it's like, to
Yeah.
me,
So
it's like,
there's
for just to make clear my point, I
yeah,
feel
yeah.
like for us to be able to have a legal system that properly adjudicates punishments, properly adjudicates conflict resolutions, you have to have some kind of tools for comparing things to other things, and kind of like using that as a basis for um and this is partly case law, but also partly based in the abstract principle itself, right?
So what I would say to that is, so to go back to your first example that you used for repeat offenders. So yeah, so you steal $100 from me, and then you get caught and you have to pay the restitution. And so we're all square. Maybe there's no punishment. I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily essential that we pin down exactly what the proper punishment is, or the proper restitution is, in order to get this point across. But so let's say that we're just even, and you go and do it again and again, and you keep getting caught, and you keep paying me back, and so on and so forth. If you wanted to have some kind of stipulation that, repeat offenders, there's a harsher punishment, about maybe eventually you say, look, if you've done it so many times, you're just ostracized from society. We banish you from the from the Hopi and Covenant community, right? You can have that, but you need to set up some kind of contract in order to, um, in order to make that possible, right? So what I would say is that when we're talking about pure legal theory, purely what should happen, absent any kind of contract, absent any kind of, other pre-agreed upon stipulations that have been made between the two parties, we're simply talking about Caruso and Friday on the island. We're simply talking about, okay, if Caruso has the stick, Friday steals the stick, what's the proper restitution for that? It's for him to give the stick back, right? When you can build up more complex, systems and, covenants and agreements and contracts between people, in order to mitigate the risk of repeat offenders, to impose harsher penalties on people that repeatedly commit crimes, or commit, crimes that you might believe are worse for some other reason outside of the NAP. All I'm saying is that purely on the NAP, purely when we're talking about, okay, what does the legal theory state that we should do in any specific case? Purely what it tells you is that you ought to restitute them, and that's pretty much it. So yes, in the case of a repeat offender, if Caruso and Friday have no pre-designed agreement, then yes, ultimately what Friday has to do is just keep giving back the stick. If you keep stealing the stick, you got to keep giving it back, bro. Sorry, you can't keep stealing it. But they could set up some kind of system like, okay, in a more complex series, okay, so a more complex society, they might say, okay, if you want to join this community and be a part of it, if you keep stealing people's stuff, then we're going to impose harsher, say financial penalties on you. And eventually, look, man, if you've done this 20 times, sorry, bro, you're banished from the community. That's just how it is. That's the contract that we've set up. You can do that. All I'm saying is that that kind of punishment is not implied by the NAP. You need a contract or some other agreement to be set out in order to get to that point, is what I'm saying.
So would you say then for an ideal libertarian legal order to be established, that you would need some sort of outside motivations and um, morality beyond just the NAP to have the
Yep.
basis for making more complexities in legal systems and contracts to mitigate the concerns that we're trying to solve.
Yeah, so I haven't thought about this too much, but I'm probably gonna just say yeah. Like I think that a society where the only governing the only thing that is put in place, the only thing that's in place to you know decide how people ought to behave is the NAP. That society would be inferior to a system that has the NAP as the basis, but then builds upon that and has contracts and other forms of that obviously don't violate the NAP, but that are built upon on top of it using some other kind of morality to, I guess, make a more complex society. So to give you the case of say, I wouldn't want to live in a society that said, okay, we subscribe to the NAP, but you also have to live like a caveman. Like you're not allowed to, if you want to be part of this community, you're not allowed to have electricity or phones or any other, we want to go back to, we want to be primitivists, NAP complying primitivists that live it as if we were, living in three, four
Technology is
thousand years ago.
aggression.
Yeah, exactly. Well, maybe they don't say technology is aggressive. We just don't.
We
We
don't believe in it.
morally
Yeah.
we don't believe in it. We don't want it for some other moral reason. I would say, look, that's a libertarian society. Okay, like it's not they're not committing aggression, but I wouldn't want to live in it because of their other moral concerns. So yes, there can be good and
Be pretty hard to
inferior.
advertise it.
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. I don't think there'd be too many people moving there. The word wouldn't spread too easily. But yeah, look, you could have societies that are libertarian compliant that would also be absolutely hellish to live in, and that I wouldn't want to live in. But they're ultimately they're not doing anything illegal, is what I would say.
Now, so I think I'm mostly in agreement with you, but to kind of bring it back to like my original post and where I'm I'm feeling like there's still something there, but maybe we can work this out.
Hmm.
Because I feel like, and let me put it this way, I feel like when you're making these judgments, you are to some extent measuring, and maybe there's not a perfect way to measure this, and maybe you have a better way to describe this, but the way that I can conceptualize it is that you are sort of making measurements of the levels of aggression being applied, right? Like a gunshot wound is more aggressive than uh, a punch to the face, and stealing $1,000 is more theft, of property than stealing $10. Um, and I feel like it would be weird to say, well, actually, no, those are all equally aggressive, right? Like that
So
seems to me to not
they're both
actually.
equally
Well, go ahead.
they're both equally illegal. They're both illegal. They're both illegal. So my point is solely that if we're talking strictly NAP here, that they're both just illegal. That's all that the NAP can tell you is both stealing $10 and stealing $1,000, $1,000,000, $1,000,000,000.
Does the NAP
Stealing a
define
penny. They're both
aggression?
illegal.
Does the NAP like help you define what aggression is and different forms of aggression?
It's the initiation of conflict. That's all that the NAP says is that and the non-aggression principle is the non initiation of conflict principle. That's all that it says in my view.
So then the NAP would literally be, so this is, it'd be very thinly just uh one ought to avoid conflict, and if someone initiates conflict, that violates the NAP.
Yeah, yeah. That's all you can get from it. And as I said, that doesn't mean I'm proposing that society ought to live by. Because again, I'm an objectivist. Okay, I have other moral beliefs beyond purely the NAP. So I'm not prescribing that people ought to live solely by the NAP. All I'm saying is that yeah, that's the extent to which the NAP can tell you how you anything about,
So
social interactions.
then aggression in this context is strictly just means initiating conflict.
Yeah, 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 correct.
Okay. I think that, I mean, I can see how that answer is consistent. Um, and I suppose I don't have much issue with it other than I think it can be a little bit weird to. So why would it
Okay,
be? Well, let me ask you
so
this. What is?
here's what I'll say. Here's what I'll say, just real quick. Here's what I'll say. I agree with you that saying that, because I think what's kind of the hold up here is that you just think it's wrong to say that stealing $10 and stealing $1,000 is the same thing.
Well, I know
I
you
think that's
agree
the
with
whole.
me on that end conclusion, but I guess where my so I'm not trying to suggest that you don't think that one's not worse than the other, right?
Yeah,
Like I know we
yeah,
agree on
yeah.
that, but I do think that to say that the NAP doesn't help us with anything other than identifying who the aggressor is. Um, I suppose the reason why let me ask you this way. This might help me to communicate to you where my hang up is.
Yeah,
What
yeah. Go.
what is wrong? Like where's the logical problem? Where is the distortion of the legal theory when we say that the NAP can be used to help us like measure different types of aggressions to say that this conflict initiation is worse than this conflict initiation, like where.
Well, I just don't know how. Well, I suppose what I'll say is I just don't know how you get there. If the NAP is the statement is, if the NAP is simply the claim that we ought not initiate that we ought not initiate conflicts, if that's what the NAP says, I don't know how you get to the end conclusion that therefore therefore X aggression is worse than Y. I don't see how you're getting to that conclusion.
I think this might be part of the issue. I think part of the problem, and I think this is always the hang up I have with like you and Zulu and others from your kind of broader community, is that I feel like I can appreciate really compartmentalizing things down to like we're just analyzing the legal theory, and that probably has its utility and use, and there's a good reason to do that. I think I'm always inclined to always marry the legal theory to reality and describe it as how it interacts with reality. Because I don't think I guess you would agree with me that there's nothing in my statement that is distorting the NAP other than you would say that you just need some sort of outside uh, ideology or outside praxis by which to uh, make those evaluations of which conflicts are worse than the other, correct?
Yeah, so I suppose what I'm simply saying is like I don't see, like you can just simply say like, look, I'm a Christian libertarian as you do. So as you do, or I'm an objectivist libertarian as I as I do. So I have my legal theory, which is that we ought not initiate conflicts, and I have another moral theory that says, okay, these are the actions that I believe people should take. And this is what and I have my prescriptions for what kind of society I want to live in, beyond simply the legal theory. So, um, yeah, I suppose I don't see why, like I don't see the issue with simply saying yeah. So all that we get from the NAP is that conflicts ought to be avoided, and then just saying okay, and then beyond this we can make all these other claims about okay, what actions are worse than others, using some other moral framework or something, and then just and going from
So
there,
it's
I suppose.
almost like, so put it this way, like the nap is sort of just the first step in any sort of moral calculation, which is like, was conflict initiated? And if it wasn't, well then that doesn't even mean that it's not immoral, but it just wouldn't be immoral on
Mhm.
the basis of the nap. And if it is immoral on the basis of the nap, okay, well all you like once you've determined or conflict's initiated, well that's you're saying that's all the nap has to say there, right? Conflict was initiated, this person's in the wrong, and now you need to bring in other systems of ethics or morality which shouldn't contradict the NAP, but that would build upon the that to be
Yeah.
like, all right, here's how we're going to respond to this. Here's how we're going to view it. Here,
Yeah.
et cetera.
Yeah, so I think to give an example, if I think as soon as you are going to start making claims about why, I think the second that you were to see a crime being committed and you're going to say, okay, this crime is really bad versus this crime being not as bad, at some point you're going to start referencing some kind of I suppose consideration that's outside the scope of libertarianism. So, for instance, the reason why we might say something like
Well,
I
couldn't
don't
you
want
just
to
measure
violate
the
TOS.
But couldn't you just measure
Like
the
say,
aggression? Like, could you I don't necessarily. So maybe this gets into how we define libertarianism, because like to me it's like it's just measuring different types of aggression, and like what like how would you like we've maybe the issue is like how do you define libertarianism? Is it just the NAP, or would you add more to that?
I think it's just a nap like that. That's the libertarian legal theory. But just to jump back real quick, um, so to give an example, so if you're going to talk about a case of, so let's say like just a standard assault where someone beats up someone else, like just punches them repeatedly, say, versus say an essay where obviously there's other stuff going on there, which I obviously don't want to necessarily get into the specifics of, but take that case. So I think most of us would agree that an essay where someone is being, those kind of actions are being performed on someone is worse than just a standard, I suppose, assault where someone's getting punched repeatedly, just in the chest, maybe say. In order to make that, determination that essay is worse than just typical assault in general, you're going to need to bring in something like, say, the mental impact that it has on the victim, right? So if you get punched in the chest, like yeah, it sucks, and you're not happy about it, and you're probably going to be really pissed off. But the mental impact that it's likely to have on you is going to be less than if you get sexually assaulted, right? So and that's fine, and you can make that determination. But yeah, I think sexual assault is worse than just standard assault, because for one of the reasons being because of the mental impact that it has on someone who has that done to them, is violated in that way. But once you're doing that, as soon as you're making that determination, you're stepping outside of the scope of what libertarianism, the legal theory, has to offer you in terms of what claims it can make,
Well, would
what
you
simply saying that conflict initiation is wrong can make about these determinations. Mental state and mental kind of impact are not kind of factored into whether a conflict has been initiated or not, is what I would say.
Sure. What would you say to like the economic, like is there an economic side to libertarianism, or would you say that the like the study of free markets, like Austrian economics and Mises and Rothbard, what they did in the study of economics, while compatible with libertarian legal theory, would you just say that those are different things?
I would say so. I think there's obviously a heavy amount of overlap, but I think we need to distinguish between, just so again, like most of us are going to be both Austrian economists and libertarians, because we kind of adopt an individualist mentality when it comes to both economics, just in terms of how we look at the world, right? How we look at people's behavior. We adopt an individualist methodology, which is going to lead us to kind of thinking of things in the terms that both Austrians think of things and in terms of how libertarian legal scholars think of things, right? But they are different categories. So what I would say is you could be, you know, a libertarian who believes that conflicts ought not be initiated, while wanting to see your hypothetical society that you want to live in engage in voluntary protectionism or tariffs. I would give it as an example. So like you might say, okay, well, I want to have a totally autarkic libertarian society where everything is produced within my community, and we're not going to engage in any kind
Or
of trade with any community outside of us. I think that would be the Austrian economists would say there's going to be bad. I mean, not purely on the Austrian economists, when they combine their knowledge of economics with their desire for human flourishing, they're going to say, look, that's a really bad idea. You shouldn't do that. You shouldn't try and be self-sufficient. You should engage in trade with other people. But it's not a non-libertarian society just because they don't agree with, or either don't agree with Austrian economists or just ignore them, right? So it's still a libertarian society, but it's not a society that's following the prescriptions that Austrian economists would make. So yeah, I think there is a distinction there between economics and between the legal theory of libertarianism. I don't think they're one and the same.
Okay. No, I think that makes sense. I mean, other than I think there's also a difference between how we present. Like, I'm often trying to argue for these ideas in layman's terms, and so I'll often just tell people, like, here's a libertarian, theory of law and the NAP, and here's libertarian economics, because if I start saying this is Austrian economics, they're just gonna, like, already, like, you know like, I'm already struggling to keep their attention span on what we're talking about, and if I
Yeah.
start throwing too many terms at them, it's gonna be a little that much harder of a
Yeah.
conversation. But I don't really have much quibble with that, and I think I
So I
appreciate the
think I
distinction
think
you're making.
the reason, I suppose, why it's important is because it's something that Stephen Kinsella has talked about a lot, where we need to be really, like, I suppose, precise in how we use terms and what they mean. Because, like, I don't necessarily have a problem with you saying, "Hey, look, I believe in libertarian economics." Like, I don't think that's like, I like, it's kind of more of a semantic issue more than anything else. But
Yeah,
I do
yeah,
think it's relevant because you just really want to like, as you kind of mentioned the word compartmentalize. Like, you really want to be specific when you talk about these things, because if you're not, then you run into the issue of people being able to. So I think the classic example, to use an example here, that Kinsella has used, the libertarians, even as recently as kind of Rothbard, and others, kind of use the Lockean kind of mixing your labor to appropriate property. That's kind of the term that Locke used, as I'm sure you're aware. When he
yep,
said, "Oh, so someone comes to own something because they mixed their labor with it." And Kinsella points out, like, that's a really, really, like, wishy-washy
yeah. I
and
agree.
vague term. And I like, because I used to use the term mixing your labor when I used to debate, socialists and stuff. And they say, well, if I simply picked up an apple, have I really mixed my labor with it? If at what point exactly, and they'll make this point, at what point exactly have you mixed enough labor, so to speak, to become the owner of the property? And it's tough to give a good answer to that. So what I'm getting at is being really specific with our terminology and saying, look, libertarianism is a legal theory. It's a theory about what actions are illegal and what actions are legal. That's the kind of the point of it. And I think to bring up a debate example, the whole when obviously yourself, I haven't watched your debate with Andrew Wilson in full. I obviously watched Dave's a couple of times, and I was disappointed with how Dave went about it. And I think part of the reason was because, like, he strayed away from thinking of libertarianism as like a legal theory, and he's just trying to think of like a general kind of, I suppose, wishy-washy kind of social attitude where, these are the outcomes that would be really good if we were to start, being free market economists and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, if you want to drill down and get to the point of why libertarianism is correct, you need to be specific about what it is. And the more specific you are, the more chance you have of being successful in debates and convincing other people. Because
I,
I
I
think the big issue with how he went about it. So I know I've droned on. I'll be real brief here. I think the problem with what Dave did in that debate with Andrew is he lets Andrew just kind of jump in and kind of, he starts talking about, well, the libertarians don't have any issue with, incest if there's no child that can be conceived and that kind of thing. And Dave just won't really just make the point. Like, look, dude, libertarianism is a legal theory. Okay, it has nothing to say about morality. Well, not nothing to say. Sorry, it doesn't have. It's not a fully fleshed out moral theory that can tell you why incest is wrong, but it doesn't preclude you from doing that, is what I'm trying to getting at. So I think being specific in these terms and kind of really identifying, okay, what are we talking about when we talk about libertarianism? I think that's important.
Yeah, no, there's a lot there. I think that the reason why I think a lot of times, like what Dave did in his debate with Andrew, which I tried to as well, is that it's sort of a both and thing. It's like, listen, I think that uh, it's not consistent, well, logically, morally, ethically, to initiate conflict, to violate the non-aggression principle, but also let's look at all of the consequences of that via the state, via central planning, via fiat currency, et cetera, et cetera. And because unfortunately we do live in a society where I'm using the meme, but we live in a society where people are more conditioned to care about the outcomes than they are about just like, well, is the abstract principle, you know, morally, logically consistent and valid. Like I can appreciate that, but like that's not actually going to convince a whole lot of people outside of those of us who kind of already care and have come to that conclusion on our own anyway. Like I'm not saying we shouldn't bring it up, but it's kind of like in a debate setting, it doesn't act like maybe you could say I won the debate, but did you persuade anybody if all you got up there was said like, well, by the law of excluded middle, it's impossible to validly say that it's preferable to initiate conflict. So therefore, the nap is superior and true and ethical, and therefore, like I win the debate. Like first of all, be a really short opening argument and just point to keep on harping on. And again, like I feel like the only people who are persuaded by that are the people who are already looking at the world that way.
I'm just going to have to kind of disagree there. Like, I think, well, to give an example, like Andrew Wilson, I think we would both agree is an effective, I suppose, polemicist. He's good at debating. He catches people in, puts people in tricky situations all the time on debate stages, whatever format he's doing.
Yep.
And he uses logical arguments all the time. He references, the three laws of logic in his debates. He talks about how, look, man, you're either this statement's true or not true, and you're conflating the two, and this is why.
But
He
he
uses
also
these
references, like he, at least in my debate and Dave's debate, he referenced the consequences a lot because what he tries to do is to say, well, if we go with your moral framework, then all these people are going to be committing incest, and with me it
well,
was
but that's where
also,
Dave should have jumped in and just said, well, no, because that's not because libertarianism isn't the entire scope of my moral framework. And that's
well,
where I think
actually,
he would have
I
been
feel like,
better off.
well, yeah, but then I feel like at that point, I don't know what like so like the way you're defining libertarianism is so narrow that like it's almost hard to even do uh, debates on it because one people associate a lot more with libertarianism than just the legal theory. So I guess it's partly because like and even I have a hard time like it's one thing to define the nap that way, but libertarianism to me is sort of like a it's also it includes the legal theory, but it's also the discussion about how like social cooperation and free markets make society better and lead to more human flourishing and lead to more peace among people and society. So it's like, yeah, I get where you're coming from, and I don't think we really disagree on much here. Like I don't it is slightly
Well,
somewhat
that tends to happen when
semantics.
libertarians debate with one another, right?
Right, yeah. But I do think it's like I suppose where I'm coming from is I'm always trying to give people the why. It's like we can give people the how, but then it's also like it's a lot more compelling if we explain to people, listen, I'm not just really interested in this because like I'm a philosophy geek or I'm really into ethics and I'm really into law and legal theory. Like I care about this because this is literally life or death for millions of people when we stray away from these guiding principles. And if we want to live in a society where, we can live peacefully, where our children can have, bright futures, where we're not suffering from massive, and it's like all these things are connected, and you kind of have to draw people in, I think, with that wide funnel of that why of that sort of like uh the moral weight of those issues before you get them to start caring about like the underlying uh, abstract principles and the logical consistency of them and whatnot. So I guess there's partly like how do you win a debate, but there's also like just how do we persuade people, I guess is where I'm coming from. I
Yeah,
did
I get that.
I
I get
wanted to,
that. I just want to say, like, I think, like, we should be really concerned with convincing people who are going to care about the logical
sure,
consistency of the arguments.
well, there's a
And
good division of
like, if
labor,
someone's
right?
not concerned about that, then like, well, I suppose if someone's not coming at this and concerned about being logically consistent,
You still there? I think I lost you. I heard him say if people don't care about being logically consistent, and then he just dropped off. I'll give it a minute here to see if he I don't think it's on my end. My internet's still going up. People on YouTube who still see me. And people on Twitter, can you people on the Twitter give some emojis? Yeah, so you guys I guess I don't know if I don't know if you can hear me open borders hop in. Maybe try stepping back in because your uh audio just kind of like I can't hear it anymore. Uh I do not like, Elon needs to work on I just do not like the way that I don't know what the right word is, just the OS, the operating system for things like spaces and whatnot. Everything on Twitter related to spaces and video is not really optimized well for use. All right, I'm gonna approve. Well, that's weird. It doesn't let me. All right, let me try this. Invite to speak.
Hello.
Hey, there you are.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I was just talking, and then
It
I
just
stopped, and
yeah,
then
it
you
just
didn't keep
completely
talking.
yeah, it just
Yeah,
completely disappeared.
yeah. So, did you hear all of that, or
No, I
was I
heard you.
speaking to no one?
I heard you go like the last thing you said was you were concerned about if people aren't approaching it from a point of logical consistency, and then you cut off.
Yeah, right. So I think I was just talking to myself for a little bit there, but that's all right. So yeah, look, I suppose all I'm getting at is, look, I'm concerned with getting people who are going to um, care about principle first and foremost, because I think if you argue to people on a pragmatic basis, then they're just as quickly going to turn away. Like I think we've seen this with the kind of the post-libertarian, pragmatist crowd, like the Pete Quinone types who have just kind of said, well, I don't really care about the principles anymore because it's going to take too long to get to the outcomes that I want.
Sure.
And I don't kind of want to, I'm concerned about the libertarian message getting subverted by those people and us, you know, I think it would detract from our overall ability to get to where the kind of society that you and I kind of want.
Well, so we're getting towards the end here, but I'll kind of ask one last question that we'll definitely not have enough time to properly answer. But I
Yeah.
so I guess partly what I'm motivated by is that I have 5 kids. I have people I care about in my life. I want to see wins in the direction of creating a more free and by consequence safe society, because I think safety is actually tied to liberty. If you sacrifice, famous saying, if you sacrifice safety for liberty for safety, you'll get neither. Like I believe that, but like I get what I said before was there's a division of labor here. I do think that is an important role for people like Kinsella, for people like Zulu, etc., who just focus on the theory, and you guys are going to attract the people, um, and even catch people like mine attention who care about the theory and want to understand the theory better, be able to explain the theory better, be able to explain how it applies to anything from very important broad questions to even like tiny very specific details that people are interested in about like that's important and we need it, and I don't want to undersell the importance of that. But I also feel like if that's all libertarians are ever doing, and we're not like, for example, like, and listen, we'll see how it plays out, but I at least commend the spirit of what Angela and the Mises Caucus are doing here, where they're like, you know what, like, we weren't going to have a candidate this year who was going to go wake a lot of people up, but we've leveraged some political connections and stuff to try to and a voting block to try to gain concessions out of Trump and the people around him to maybe do like at least some small things on the borders, like, and I mean I don't know, we'll see what happens. I mean Trump released videos today doubling down on the I'm going to abolish the Department of Education, saying he's going to get do more to get government out of funding even secondary education. And everyone in his team and people who talk to him say he is going to free Ross Ulbricht. So it's like, I don't know. Listen, definitely voting for Trump could be described as voting for a lot of statist, unlibertarian policies, and everything about like even the good things he's going to be doing are going to be very flawed if we're judging them on the basis of the non-aggression principle and is conflict being initiated. It's also very flawed by a basic understanding of Austrian economics. But it's like by casting this sort of strategy out there, I hope that A, it can create some small victories, and two, um, it gets more people to at least hear about libertarian and libertarian adjacent ideas, which is important. Because I just think there's a lot of people who were like, we should always be trying to grow and gather the remnant, but there's also a bunch of people who aren't going to get there by the same route that like we did, and we still need to be trying to do something to get them closer to us. I think to try to make our society somewhat freer if we can. Uh, I'll give you the last word here. Like, what are your thoughts on that general? Because it relates to the conversation we had, which is like, uh, if it, because I think what people are doing is they're bringing in something that's not the NAP, in your opinion, to kind of go like, well, all right, these are all violations of the non-aggression principle, but let's try to go for what's the least violation, and is there utility in pursuing that? I guess that's kind of the question.
Yeah. So I'll, as you said, obviously we do need to wrap up. So I'll try and keep this briefish. First thing I want to say is you nearly triggered me when you said do stuff on the borders. I nearly flipped my shit because and I realized, okay, so he's not actually saying borders. He's saying on the margins.
On the margins,
It's
yes.
okay. You almost caused me to have a heart attack, but we're okay. But yeah, so I don't really have many. This has been a common theme. I don't have many issues with what you said. Like if you're a an Austrian economist, if you're a Bob Murphy, or if you're a whoever, and you want to go out and debate people on why the Federal Reserve is bad, or why Austrian business cycle theory is correct, or why our theory of interest rates in general is correct, or why the Hayekian pyramid or triangle is the correct way to look at the structure of production, then go for it. And I hope I want you to succeed and do well, and debate those topics, and win debates and convince people. And the same thing on other various topics on economics, on philosophy. My only point is this: I want to see people in their own heads when they're going out and talking to people that aren't libertarians, and trying to win these debates and convince people, to have it very clear in their minds about what they mean when they use certain terms. And I think the problem we have is people will conflate, and at least, and look, if you don't have in your own mind exactly what you mean when you say something, how the fuck can you expect someone that you're disagreeing with and you're debating with to possibly understand it, right? So you need to. I want people. I just see this issue where I see libertarians go out and debate people that have their own understanding of philosophy and have coherent worldviews, at least in their own minds, and get demolished in these debates and make us look really bad because they don't have clear in their own minds what they're referring to when they say a specific thing. So to bring it back to our conversation we've just had now, what I want to see, if it was when I go out and debate, when I say libertarianism, I'm referring to the legal theory. I'm referring to the fact that aggression is not permissible. It's a sorry, we should avoid conflicts at all times. That's what I mean when I say libertarianism, and I'll use the words like libertarian legal theory, all that kind of stuff to signify that. And then it just more or less it just makes it more clear to people when you're debating them, or to your audience, what exactly you're talking about when you use these terms, and it helps you to be a more effective debater. And then you can go out there and say, okay, so because what you'll see, and I think this happened with like again, to bring it back to the Andrew Wilson stuff, is like, look, Dave can make all of the, because obviously, look, Andrew's got a very good understanding of philosophy from his perspective, and he's good at debating these topics and good at debating on using presuppositional arguments and that kind of thing. So you need to have you can absolutely make like the claims about, look, if we adopted free market economics, or if we abolished the Federal Reserve, or did all this kind of stuff, all these good things would happen. We'd live in a more prosperous and better society. but you need to have that grounding and be able to come back to, if you're going to call yourself a libertarian, you need to be able to come back to at all times the fundamental principles of the non-aggression principle and be able to make that strict argument. Because if you can't, then someone like Andrew is going to be able to come in and say, well, I can just toss away all of your other consequential arguments because you can't give me the moral foundation for your philosophy. And if you can't do that, then I'm going to reject everything that you build up on top of it. And as they should, right? If you can't make the moral foundation, if you can't prove the moral foundations of your philosophy, then they should outright reject it and say, look, until you can give me one, I'm not going to adopt your framework. Okay. And that's fine. That's what they should do. So having that basic moral foundation is really, really important for these debates. You can win debates with people that aren't really good at philosophy just on these consequential arguments. But as soon as you debate people that are really good at it, you're going to run into trouble. And that's the thing that happens is, look, it only takes one bad debate for people to start to see you as, a poor debater and start to use it as clips, as fuel to promote anti-libertarian messages and call us all idiots that don't think about our own philosophy. So you need to be, if you're going to go out there and debate, you need to know your stuff. You need to know exactly what you're talking about. And that's why I think it's important that we understand exactly what libertarianism is, what the legal theory proposes, and be really specific about it. Anyway, that's all I got to say.
All righty. Well, appreciate this conversation, man. We'll have to do some more in the future because there's at least like 20 different directions we could still take this. But glad we at least were able to impromptu get conversation 1 down and in the books. Thank you everyone for tuning in and listening. Those watching on YouTube, please make sure you give this video a thumbs up before we sign off. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Appreciate you guys here in the spaces as well. And yeah, I will be back here tomorrow night doing a live stream in spaces with the Libertarian Party Christian Caucus and pro-life caucuses. We'll be talking to Angela McArdle, Josh Smith, and other libertarians about recent election results for libertarians, as well as the stuff with Trump. So it'll be a lot of fun. Make sure you tune in for that. That'll be at 8 o'clock Eastern time. So I think I've already made posts about that. So, and it's already scheduled on YouTube, unlike this one, which was scheduled a minute beforehand. So, but that's what's coming up this week. I think I also have a stream. Actually, yeah, this Saturday, I'll be with our mutual friend, Casimir, be on the show. So that'll be a lot of fun.
That's my guy.
Yep.
That's my guy.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Catch you guys. Thanks for that, Jacob.
Yep. Thank you.
No worries.